Welcome, dear listeners, to a story that delves deep into the shadows of rural life, where the lines between reality and the supernatural blur. Gather close, for this is a tale of mystery, of haunting secrets, and the unyielding courage of one soul. In a quaint, forgotten village, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, there was an old saying, "No village is complete without a fool." It was believed that every village had its own fool, but the truth behind this adage was far more complex than anyone could imagine. Years ago, when it was an honor to serve in rural education, a young man named John Davis, full of idealism and energy, took up the mantle of a teacher in this very village. Life in the countryside was hard, and those with education rarely stayed, making John's arrival a welcomed event. He quickly became a beloved figure in the community, especially among the children. One day, after school, John decided to visit the home of one of his students for a routine check-in. On his way, he stumbled upon a group of children embroiled in a scuffle. To be precise, they were mercilessly beating another child, a dirty, disheveled boy. John rushed to intervene, demanding to know why they were attacking him. "He's a fool, Mr. Davis," one of the children replied. "He doesn't feel pain." John took a closer look at the boy, who indeed seemed different. His clothes were torn, and his body bore the marks of numerous old wounds. Before John could speak to him, the boy turned and fled. John chastised the bullies, but they defended their actions, claiming that the boy often attacked them unprovoked. Curious and concerned, John decided to investigate further. He learned that the boy, named Sam Miller, had been a normal, happy child until the age of 7. Then, one day, he simply stopped returning home, preferring to stand at the edge of the village, staring into the distance as if guarding against some unseen threat. His parents tried to bring him back, but he would always run away. Tragically, his parents died a few years later, and Sam became a wanderer, surviving on the charity of the villagers. Determined to help, John began to watch over Sam, often bringing him food. He found him one afternoon perched high in a tree, vigilantly scanning the horizon. "Come down, Sam," John called. "Hey, I brought you something to eat." Sam glanced down but didn't budge. "I can't," he said. "I'm keeping watch." Intrigued, John climbed up and joined him. "What are you watching for?" he asked. "Bad things," Sam replied, his eyes wide and serious. "I can't let them get into the village." John humored him, asking what these bad things looked like. Sam described them in eerie detail: tall, oily figures with long limbs, creatures with 3 heads that stank of rot. He claimed to fight them off to protect the village. "You're very brave, Sam," John said, unsure whether to believe him or not. "But what if you can't defeat them?" Sam's expression darkened. "Then someone in the village will suffer or die. I have to protect everyone." Years passed, and John's stint in the village ended. He returned to the city, carrying with him the memory of the mysterious boy. 2 decades later, curiosity drew him back to the village. He found it much the same, though the people had aged. And there, among the revelers at a wedding feast, sat Sam. He was alone at a table, his hair now gray, his face lined with new scars, yet his eyes held the same vigilant gleam. John learned from the villagers that Sam had become a local legend, a village guardian. People whispered that every village had such a guardian, someone who seemed foolish or mad, but whose presence was believed to ward off disaster. They called these guardians wardens of the wood. Sam Miller, it seemed, was their warden. Some said these wardens were on a spiritual quest, bearing the village's misfortunes on their own shoulders. Whether true or not, the villagers had come to respect and even revere Sam, seeing him as a necessary, albeit tragic, part of their community. As we conclude this tale, we reflect on the thin veil between the known and the unknown, the mundane and the mystical. Sam's story reminds us that sometimes what appears foolish or mad might be the very thing that keeps us safe from the shadows that lurk just beyond our understanding. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May we all find the courage to face our own unseen guardians and the mysteries they protect us from. Until next time, stay safe and keep your hearts open to the unknown. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. I have a chilling tale to share with you, one that will send shivers down your spine and make your heart race. This story is from a time long past, filled with mystery and eerie occurrences. Settle in, for this is a tale of childhood mischief that turned into a nightmare, a story that haunted me for years. I grew up in a small, quiet village in the countryside. The year was 1990, and there wasn't much for entertainment. But we found our fun in the fields, forests, and hill that surrounded our homes. My two best friends, Peter and Sam, were always by my side. Together we explored every nook and cranny of our village, turning the mundane into the extraordinary. One Thursday afternoon, after school let out early, the three of us decided to venture to the hill on the western edge of our village. We were drawn there by the promise of adventure, a break from the monotony of our rural lives. It was Peter who first spotted it. A small, peculiar house hidden among the tall grasses at the foot of the hill. It was no more than a meter high, made of some sort of dull metal, and it looked ancient and out of place. "Let's check it out," Peter said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. I hesitated. "I don't know, guys. My family always says to stay away from these kinds of places. They say they're bad luck." Sam scoffed. "Come on, don't be a coward. It's just an old shack. What's the worst that could happen?" Peer pressure is a powerful thing, especially when you're a kid. So we approached the little house, each of us taking turns kicking it. It wasn't long before the flimsy structure toppled over with a loud crash. We laughed, feeling a strange thrill at our act of destruction. The exhilaration carried us through the rest of the day, and we went home as the sun set, completely unaware of the darkness that was about to descend on our lives. That night, tragedy struck. Peter's parents woke to the sounds of their son screaming. Rushing to his room, they found Peter being savagely attacked by their usually gentle family dog. Despite their frantic efforts to pull the animal away, it was too late. Peter was gone. The dog, which had never shown a hint of aggression before, was put down immediately, but the damage was done. The village was in shock, and so were we. The next day I visited Peter's house. The sight of his torn body, the sheer brutality of the attack, haunted me. Sam and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary tragedy. We remembered the strange house and our senseless destruction. It had to be connected, but we didn't dare tell anyone, afraid they'd think we were crazy, or worse, blame us for what happened. A week passed. The village was still reeling from Peter's death when Sam disappeared. One evening, he simply vanished without a trace. His parents, frantic with worry, searched everywhere. The entire village came together, scouring fields, forests, and streams, but Sam was never found. The fear that gripped me was paralyzing. I was certain that whatever dark force we had angered was coming for me next. Terrified, I turned to my grandfather, the wisest person I knew. When I finally confessed what we had done, his face grew pale. He scolded me harshly, calling us foolish children who had meddled with forces beyond our understanding. But he didn't just chastise me. He set about trying to protect me. Grandfather consulted with the village elders and spent hours researching old texts and traditions. Eventually, he found a way to shield me from the vengeful spirit he believed we had awoken. He took me to a massive, ancient oak tree that stood in the center of our village, a tree that had stood there for centuries and was believed to hold protective powers. He tied a red cloth with my name on it to one of the branches and another around my wrist. He told me that this would bind me to the tree, making it my guardian. "You must never take this off," he warned, "not until you turn 20. This tree is your protector now. As long as you respect it, it will keep you safe." Every year after that, I returned to the tree, offering gifts and prayers, showing my gratitude and asking for its continued protection. I lived in constant fear, jumping at shadows and dreading the day the curse might finally catch up with me. But as the years passed and nothing happened, I began to believe that perhaps my grandfather's remedy had worked. Now, decades later, I still remember those harrowing events with perfect clarity. The fear, the guilt, the sense of impending doom, they have never truly left me. But I also remember the wisdom and love of my grandfather, and the mysterious power of the old oak tree that stood as my silent guardian. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a reminder that our actions, no matter how small, can have profound and unexpected consequences. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, and that it leaves you with a sense of wonder and perhaps a bit of caution. Until next time, stay curious and be mindful of the mysteries that surround us every day. Hello, dear listeners. I'm thrilled to have you join me today. I've got a chilling tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. It's a story about old shoes, mysterious happenings, and a haunting discovery. Let's dive right in. One day, our friend Jack was out and about, wandering the streets of a small town he had moved to for work. Jack, not one for formal education, had always found himself on construction sites, working hard to make ends meet. This particular afternoon, he found himself at a loose end and decided to explore. Jack's worn-out shoes had seen better days, and as he passed under a bridge, he noticed a man selling old shoes. Now, in this town, it wasn't unusual to find such stalls. They offered second-hand shoes mended and sold at a fraction of the price of new ones, ideal for laborers like Jack. Jack's eyes fell on a pair that seemed to be in decent condition. After some haggling, he bought them for a mere $2.90. He discarded his old shoes right there, slipping into his new purchase and heading back to his workplace. That evening, as Jack returned to the construction site, he noticed a group of workers scrubbing off some graffiti, red paint scrawled across the walls, a common sight when workers were protesting unpaid wages. Jack, always friendly, offered them a smoke and struck up a conversation. He learned that the previous boss had run off, leaving behind a trail of unpaid workers and unfinished business. Later that night, Jack went to bed early, tired from the day's wandering. His colleagues, engrossed in a game of cards, didn't notice when he suddenly sat up in bed. One of them glanced over and saw Jack, fully dressed and wearing those new shoes. Yet his eyes were closed, as if he were still asleep. Curious and concerned, they called out to him, but Jack didn't respond. He walked out of the room and his friends decided to follow him, fearing he might get into trouble. They trailed him as he headed out of the site towards an old abandoned plot filled with construction debris. The place was eerily quiet and reeked of decay. Jack, seemingly in a trance, began digging through the rubble with his bare hands. His friends watched in horror as his fingers bled, but he kept on digging. Then, one of them let out a gasp. Buried in the dirt was a human face. They immediately called the police, who arrived quickly, cordoning off the area and starting their investigation. The workers whispered among themselves, wondering who the victim might be, and how Jack had known to dig there. Jack, now awake, was as bewildered as the rest, claiming he had no memory of leaving his bed. The police identified the body as that of a worker named Simon, who had gone missing months earlier. When Simon's widow was brought in to identify the body, she recognized not just her husband, but also the shoes Jack was wearing. They had belonged to Simon. Jack became a suspect, but he insisted he had no memory of the night's events beyond falling asleep. The investigation turned up nothing that implicated Jack directly. However, it soon became apparent that Simon had been buried there by the previous boss, who had fled to avoid the consequences of his actions. Simon had died in an accident caused by shoddy workmanship, and the boss had covered it up, hoping it would never be discovered. The police eventually apprehended the former boss, who confessed to his crimes. Simon's body was given a proper burial, and Jack was cleared of any suspicion. Yet the mystery of how Jack had been led to the exact spot where Simon was buried remained unsolved. As for the shoes, Their journey to the second-hand stall was never explained. Perhaps in some way, Simon had guided Jack to uncover the truth, ensuring that justice was finally served. Thank you for joining me for this eerie tale of mystery and justice. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes the past has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it's buried. I hope you found this narrative as chilling and intriguing as I did. Stay tuned for more stories that will captivate your imagination. Until next time, take care and keep wondering about the mysteries that surround us. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to a tale that will send shivers down your spine and make your heart race. Today I have a story for you that is both eerie and utterly captivating, something you won't soon forget. So, get comfortable, but not too comfortable, because what I'm about to tell you will leave you on the edge of your seat. This story unfolds in 2013, in a quiet, seemingly abandoned construction site in a small, nondescript town. The building, a dilapidated high-rise, had been left unfinished for several years. Scavengers often broke in to steal metal and other valuable materials. So the site owners hired a couple, John and Mary, to guard the premises. John, a stout and diligent man from the countryside, took his job seriously, patrolling the site nightly. One evening, John was doing his usual rounds, making his way up to the 10th floor of the eerie, unfinished building. As he approached the dark hallway, he noticed a shadowy figure lurking at the staircase landing. His heart skipped a beat, but he quickly switched on his flashlight and ran toward the figure, suspecting it was a trespasser. To his surprise, the figure darted into a nearby room. John yelled, "Stop right there! I'm calling the police!" But as he reached the room, he was taken aback. The doorway was sealed shut with heavy wooden boards. How could anyone get inside? Determined to uncover the truth, John peered through the cracks of the wooden barrier, shining his flashlight into the room. To his shock, he saw 3 shadowy figures standing still inside. He shouted, "Who are you? Come out now, or I'll call the cops!" The figures remained motionless, their features obscured by the darkness. John's mind raced. There had to be another entrance. He frantically searched the surrounding area, but found nothing. He returned to the boarded-up room, the figures still eerily standing there. Desperation mounting, he pried at the wooden boards, pulling them away until he created a gap large enough to squeeze through. Inside, John faced the 3 figures. They stared at him with pale, lifeless faces and unsettling smiles. He pleaded, "Look, just leave. I won't report you." But as he spoke, the figures' appearances began to distort, like a faulty television signal. John realized with growing horror that these were not ordinary trespassers. Suddenly, their distorted faces twisted into grotesque, nightmarish visages. John's blood ran cold as the figures advanced towards him, their bodies contorting unnaturally. In his panic, John stumbled backward, tripping over a loose cement block and crashing to the ground. Though his head throbbed with pain, John fought to stay conscious. He watched in terror as the figures came closer, their forms becoming increasingly grotesque. Overwhelmed by fear and pain, John blacked out. When he awoke, he found himself in a hospital bed. His wife, Mary, had grown worried when he didn't return and had found him unconscious on the 10th floor. She had rushed him to the hospital just in time. As John recounted his terrifying experience, Mary revealed a chilling discovery. She had learned that 3 people had died in that very room years ago, and it had been sealed ever since. The last guard had died mysteriously too. His heart stopped by fright, with his adrenaline levels off the charts. John was lucky to have passed out when he did. The doctor said that if he had remained conscious, who knows what he might have witnessed next. It was a narrow escape and a stark reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. Thank you for listening to this spine-tingling tale. It's stories like these that remind us of the mysteries and dangers lurking in forgotten corners. I hope you enjoyed it and will join me again for another thrilling story. Until then, stay safe, and keep your curiosity in check. You never know what might be waiting in the shadows. And with that, we've reached the end of our harrowing tale. May it linger in your mind, serving as a reminder that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Thank you for joining me, and have a wonderfully haunted evening. Greetings, dear listeners. Gather around as I share with you a spine-chilling tale of mystery and the supernatural. A story that will make your heart race and send shivers down your spine. This is a tale about the strange and eerie events that unfolded for my friend John Harper in the quiet and quaint town of Maplewood 6 years ago. Sit tight as we journey into the unknown. John had been working in the city for quite some time. When he got an early break for the holidays, he decided to return to his hometown of Maplewood to celebrate Christmas with his family. Maplewood, a small town nestled in the countryside, was known for its bustling holiday markets in the days leading up to Christmas. John's mother asked him to head to the market to buy some festive goods. He had been cooped up at home since he arrived, and, although he was reluctant, he agreed to go. The market was bustling with people, each person busy with their preparations for the upcoming festivities. As John wandered through the market, he took in the sights and sounds of his childhood. The air was filled with the scent of fresh pine and baked goods. Just as he was beginning to feel the holiday spirit, something unusual caught his eye. An old man in a thick fur coat was selling something quite different from the usual market fare. Behind his bicycle, a wooden pole stood with several skinned weasels tied to it, and hanging from the frame were a few fur pelts. John had always felt an inexplicable fear of weasels, stemming from the many tales he had heard as a child. Seeing them now, even in this state, made him uneasy. The old man noticed John's interest and approached him with a grin. "Care to buy one, lad? Freshly caught this morning," he said, his voice gruff yet persuasive. John quickly shook his head and turned to leave, but as he did, his eyes caught something in a metal cage by the old man's feet. Inside the cage was a live weasel, its eyes dark and intelligent, darting around nervously. John found himself unable to look away from those eyes. They seemed to draw him in, like a pair of black holes, pulling him into their depths. He stood there, entranced, for what felt like an eternity, before the old man's voice broke through his daze. "This one's special," the old man said. "Caught it last night. Only $500. Without thinking, John reached into his wallet, handed over the money, and took the cage. As he walked away, he couldn't quite understand why he had spent so much on a weasel, something he had always feared. His feet carried him toward the river that ran through the town, its banks lined with wild grass and reeds. The river was frozen, a thick layer of ice covering its surface. John carefully made his way across to the other side, where the wild grasses grew thicker. He set the cage down on the ice and opened the door. The weasel bolted out, disappearing into the undergrowth in a flash. John felt a strange sense of relief and clarity wash over him as he watched it go. He left the cage behind and headed home, having forgotten all about the holiday shopping his mother had asked him to do. 3 days later, John met up with 2 childhood friends, Matt and Chris, by an old abandoned house at the edge of town. This house had been their playground growing up, but now it was a dilapidated ruin. The weather was cold, and Matt and Chris were already there, shivering as they waited for him. They decided to head to a nearby bar to warm up and catch up on old times. As they chatted and laughed, John suddenly heard his name being called from behind him. He turned, expecting to see a familiar face, but there was no one there. The voice called again, clearer this time, but still, there was no one. Matt and Chris noticed his distraction and asked what was wrong. John explained, but they just laughed it off, teasing him about hearing things. Despite their teasing, John couldn't shake the feeling. The voice seemed to call him again, more insistent this time. He made an excuse and headed towards the wild grass by the river, the same place where he had released the weasel. The voice grew louder as he approached, though it was still strangely indistinct, like a whisper carried on the wind. He followed the sound into the thick grass, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye. A small yellowish creature darted past his feet and vanished into the undergrowth. It was the weasel. Just as John was processing this, a loud crash echoed from behind him. He spun around to see the old house collapsing in on itself with a thunderous roar. John's blood ran cold. He raced back to the site, shouting for his friends. To his immense relief, Matt and Chris emerged from the debris, dazed but largely unharmed. They had been standing in a corner that remained relatively intact, shielded from the worst of the collapse. Had John been inside with them, he shuddered to think what might have happened. Later, as they sat together, nursing their injuries and trying to make sense of the event, John couldn't help but wonder about the weasel. The voice, the timing of the collapse, it all seemed too coincidental. He remembered the old tales about weasels and their mysterious abilities. Could it be that the creature he had saved had returned the favor? To this day, John remains unsure. But every time he tells the story, he can't help but think that maybe, just maybe, the weasel had indeed come back to repay a debt. And so, dear listeners, remember this tale the next time you hear a strange call in the night, or see a fleeting shadow out of the corner of your eye. Perhaps somewhere in the darkness, a small, grateful creature is watching over you. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. Stay safe, and may your nights be free of whispers and shadows.